What's going on YouTube? This is SG1 Sports and you're watching our Big Ten channel. We're going to preview the 2024 schedule for Nebraska here in this video. Before we get to that one, let's look back at the schedule from 2023. Here was Nebraska's schedule from last season. Of course, they played Colorado in the non-conference. Lost that game. At that time, everyone thought Colorado was like a top 25 team or whatever, and they wound up, of course, not finishing very well at all. But that was a tough one there, going on the road and losing that game. They played Northern Illinois, Louisiana Tech, also in the non-conference, won those games. You look at who they played out of the East. They had to play Michigan. Obviously, that was a very tough draw there. Had to play Michigan State and Maryland, so it wasn't a terrible draw. They didn't play Ohio State and Penn State, but all that's out the window now. No more divisions in the Big Ten, and of course, it's a different conference. Here is the 2024 schedule, and we'll break it down first. The non-conference, UTEP, Colorado, and Northern Iowa. So maybe even an easier non-conference schedule than what they had last year with UTEP and Northern Iowa, and then Colorado at home. I think they'll have a great chance to win that game. So not too tough of a non-conference schedule. You look at their home games, they have those three non-conference games. Then they'll play Illinois, Rutgers, UCLA, and Wisconsin. All winnable games. I mean, these are all winnable games. It's not crazy to think that Nebraska could go 7-0 in their home games this season. But they only play 4 because they play Colorado at home, because they get their big non-conference game at home. That means they'll play 4 conference games at home, and then they'll play 5 on the road. So their road games all in the Big Ten, at Purdue, at Indiana, at Ohio State, at USC, and at Iowa. And I tell you what, I mean, Purdue, Indiana, very winnable games. You look at the schedule and you can see how Nebraska could potentially have a pretty good season in 2024. So they'll start with UTEP on August 31st. That'll be a home game. Then Colorado on September 7th and Northern Iowa on the 14th. So they'll play their 3 non-conference games to start off the season. Then they will begin Big Ten play with Illinois on September 21st. Then on the road at Purdue September 28th. Follow that up with a home game against Rutgers. And then they get their first bye week after Rutgers before playing Indiana. They will play Indiana on the road. But I want to pause right there at that Indiana game. You look at UTEP, Colorado, Northern Iowa, Illinois, Purdue, Rutgers, and Indiana. These are all winnable games for Nebraska. I'm not saying they're going to win them all, but they are winnable games. Nebraska could potentially start off 7-0. If everything goes well for them, they could be 7-0 heading into that game at Ohio State. I don't know where they would be ranked because, again, it's not a very tough schedule, but they'd be in the top 25. And if they're undefeated, they'll be ranked going into a tough game at Ohio State on October 26th. It's also back-to-back road games with Indiana and Ohio State there. They'll play UCLA on November 2nd. Then they get their second bye week before going out west to play USC. So they play UCLA and USC back-to-back, but there is a bye week in between. And, again, a home game and then an away game. Then they'll play Wisconsin on the 23rd and finish things up with a road game in Iowa on November 29th, which is, of course, the Friday after Thanksgiving. That's kind of become a tradition ever since Nebraska has joined the Big Ten. So, again, you look at the first half of that schedule from UTEP to Indiana. Very favorable schedule. I mean, very favorable schedule. I think it'll be tough for them, honestly, to go 7-0 just because of where Nebraska is right now, but possible. Then you look at the other 5 games. They could potentially finish 0-5 in their last 5 games. Could that possibly happen? You know, I think it was a couple of years ago with Kansas. They started off really well, and everyone was kind of getting on the hype train with Kansas. And I said, look, they could lose the rest of their games. I think that's kind of what happened. So that's the way this schedule sets up for Nebraska. Again, I'm not saying it's going to play out that way. I think UCLA, Wisconsin, and home, they've got a real shot in those games as well. And again, I'm not saying they're going to win those first 7. Very, very easily could trip up at Purdue or even at Indiana. This Indiana team's going to be a lot better this year. But again, overall, it's a schedule for Nebraska that starts very favorable and then gets really tough in their final 5 games.